Okay, in this video we're going to look at government expenses, and government federal budget expenses equate again to around $400 billion every single year. As part of the new study guide, you need to be able to distinguish between three types of government expenditure. So there's government consumption spending, government investment spending, and transfer payments. And each of them is a little bit different in terms of how they operate. So with government consumption spending, it's all about current consumption. Government investment spending is about boosting our productive capacity and future growth, and transfer payments about providing support to certain people in need. So first of all, government consumption spending, it's about $85 billion every single year. It's also referred to as current expenditure, and it's basically for payment for goods and services that are consumed in the current budget period. They don't provide ongoing benefits for the future. They're all about providing the service or in this particular period. So it includes public servants' wages, so the wages and salaries of government employees. So that can be people working in the health sector, in education, in defence, in housing and transport. It's about in providing salaries for these people who provide services to the community. It also involves day-to-day operating expenses, so it can be about the government consuming certain products, so all the money they spend on printing and cleaning services, on any drugs they need to provide, medication used in hospitals, education materials, so anything that's basically used up in the current period, purchases of goods and services in the current period. It doesn't include welfare spending. Government capital or investment spending, or G2, it's about providing social and economic infrastructure. These are the things that are going to boost our future productive capacity. So a lot of these are about boosting aggregate supply, and they're generally about physical buildings and physical infrastructure. So it can include the building of schools, universities, roads, highways, the building of new airports or reservoirs, new hospitals. The NBN project would be included in government capital investment, building new ports. So all of this stuff that's going to provide an ongoing benefit to the economy. So defence equipment is another example. So if they build aircraft, tanks or ships, all of those things are going to be used for future periods and will provide an ongoing benefit to the community. Infrastructure on bridges, ports, telecommunications equipment, all this stuff that's going to provide an ongoing benefit and an ongoing boost to our productive capacity going forward. Government transfers are not included as part of aggregate demand. So when we look at the aggregate demand equation, we have G1 and G2 spending, so current and then capital payments. Government transfers are not included within government expenditure. So it includes all forms of welfare, so it can include grants and industry assistance given to businesses, and it also includes transfers to the private sector, which can include welfare payments, support for families, pay for carers, students, so helping students out with their loans, or providing what we call New Start allowance for young students, pensions for war veterans or the disabled, and New Start allowance for those looking for work. Most of these payments are means tested, which basically means that you only get access to them when you have under a certain amount of assets or when you have under a certain amount of income. So the pension, for example, you only get access to the pension if you have less than $800,000 worth of assets, not including your home. And there are also other forms of allowances that are income-based, like New Start allowance and the disabled pension. The aim of these payments is to make the final income more equitable than market income, so everyone can afford basic goods and services. Federal government transfers are around 35% of all budget expenditure, so it's quite a large component of total expenditure. Okay, types of expenditure being broken down. So first of all, social security and welfare is the main one at about 38%. That includes mainly unemployment benefits are not the main form of welfare. Pensions and family benefits are the main forms. They are often means or asset tested, and it includes spending on the aged, unemployed, parents and families, carers, students, disabled and war veterans. Healthcare can be broken down into current and capital expenditure. So for example, capital expenditure in healthcare would be the building of hospital buildings, if they build a new ward, if they spend money on a new X-ray machine or MRI equipment or anything that's going to help them to diagnose certain illnesses. Current expenditure would be the things that only really last for one period. So any wages to hospital staff, any payment on drugs or syringes or medical cups or gloves or any of these sort of services that are used up in the current period. Defence spending, this is spending on new equipment and border protection. Some of this would belong to capital expenditure, so equipment that's going to be used for a long period of time, but then the day-to-day running expenditure like the wages of the military would be examples of current expenditure. Surveillance activities, peacekeeping activities, border protection, all of that belongs within defence spending. Education, again, can be broken up into current and capital expenditure. So education is mainly on universities, and they also support state and non-government schools. However, most of the expenditure for secondary and primary education is the state governments. Current expenditure may be things like buying whiteboard markers, wages to teachers and things like that. Capital expenditure would be on computer equipment, electronic whiteboards, the physical building of schools, so the grounds, etc. General public services, again, that's like the admin and the running costs for the government, so the wages of public servants. Transport and communications, so capital expenditure would include roads and aviation and port facilities, and the NBN would belong in transportation. Public debt, the interest they pay on the debt is another form of expenditure, so it's a current expenditure. Because the government has run consistent budget deficits, they now have close to $500 billion worth of debt to both the private and overseas sector, so they're required to pay large amounts of interest every year, equating to around $17 billion, which makes a significant amount of interest for the government every single year. Net payments to other governments, so federal handouts to state and local governments to help them provide things like public education and health is another example of a government expense. Just back to the public debt and the interest associated with that, you think about that, that's $17 billion going out of our economy every year that can't be spent on other goods and services. As again, the major areas of expenditure, so social security and welfare up the top, and then things like health being the second biggest, all the way to transport and communications and education. Expenditure mix, again, very similar breakdown of what it was in 2016, 2017, with social security being the highest. Total government revenue expenditure is around 25% of our GDP, so any changes in revenues and expenditure can have a large impact on our living standards because it's such a large component. Okay, our GDP is around 1.6 trillion, so revenues and expenditures equate to around $400 billion each. Thank you.